If you have ever struggled with a toxic family dynamic or are currently struggling with a toxic family dynamic, this is the podcast episode for you because on today's episode of the No Bullshit Manifestation Show, I had the honor of chatting with my friend Adri Thomas, who is a tech dropout turned life coach who has navigated her own life experiences with being in a toxic family dynamic. And everything that Adri shares with us in this podcast episode is so vulnerable and so important because I know that there are so many of you who have reached out to me letting me know that you grew up in abusive households, that you grew up in scenarios that really didn't support or serve you, and now are navigating in your adult life through your healing journey. So this podcast episode is truly incredible. Adri does such incredible work in the world with helping people overcome what they experienced growing up so that they can live their best, most fulfilling lives now. So, like I mentioned a little bit about Adri, she is a tech dropout turned life coach, and she specializes in working with people on their healing journey, finding their true soul's potential and purpose, and navigating their healing from toxic family environments. And if you want to connect with Adri, you can check out the show notes down below to find her on social media and connect with her. I highly suggest doing so if this podcast episode resonates with you. And without further ado, let's dive into this. What's up, and welcome to the No Bullshit Manifestation Show, the podcast that demystifies all of the nonsense that surrounds manifestation and gives you a realistic view of what it's like to be on a personal, professional, and spiritual growth journey. I'm your host, Kat Kozad, manifestation and money mindset expert, and I'm so happy you're here. Let's fucking do this thing. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast, Adri, so thank you for being here.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, cool. So let's dive into this with you sharing your story with all of us of what led you to be who you are and what you're doing and making the impact that you're making in the world.
Yes, well, I'm going to give everyone just a very abbreviated version. So I will start with saying I was born into a cult in Oregon, and I grew up in that cult for most of my life. When I was about 10 years old, I lost my father to a sudden massive heart attack. I was then raised by my mom, who is very mentally ill. So it was a really hard childhood. And after my father's death, I began to be assaulted by a family member for years to come after that. After I graduated from college, I got married very quickly. And if anyone is familiar with toxic family systems, they'll know how common it is for people who come from that to get married pretty young because they use that as a means of escape, which is how I really saw it. I thought that having a husband was going to give me security and help me get out of my family system. The marriage did not end up working out. It was pretty toxic, and it was a really unhappy place, but it did give me a solid ground for starting my healing journey, which has been so impactful. And ultimately, after 9 years in that relationship, I decided to leave it. And I decided that I was going to move to a state I'd only ever been to one time. I packed up my dog. It was the day before New Year's, and the timing could not have been worse. There was a snowstorm basically from Oregon all the way to Colorado. My dog and I got stuck in Utah for a couple days, but we eventually made it to Denver. We set up our house here, our home, and we are now just living our best lives in Denver, healing and figuring out how, we're going to bring our message to the world. So
good. So cool. And I feel so lucky that I've been able to watch bits and pieces of your journey. And something that I don't think I actually knew about your journey until more recently was the fact that you grew up in a cult. And I know that a lot of the women here on the No Bullshit Manifestation Show, that's been a part of their experience as well. So I know so many people are going to relate to this. But to give us an idea or paint like a picture, like what was that like growing up in a cult?
Because it was all I had ever known, I knew from a very young age that it was really frustrating because it went really against what you felt like was right for human nature. It controlled everything that you did, everything that you watched, how you spent your money, how you thought. It literally had control over everything. And so I remember being really young and thinking, this doesn't quite feel right. But in order to get love from my mom, I had to conform to this cult. And it became my community, which again, it has a huge emphasis on conformity. So it felt really scary, but it also felt safe because it was all I knew. And I knew that if I could conform to the rules, then I could be accepted.
Totally. How do you feel as though that stepping into like who you are now and the healing journey that you've been on, like how did that aspect of like conforming and like having to play by a certain rule books impact the beginning of your healing journey?
It was really difficult. I think when I started to understand that so much of my life had been predetermined for me for other people, I started to realize how unhappy I had been, and I started to assert my voice and my opinion. And that was met with so much resistance from my family, from other people in the cult, from my spouse, I knew that I was onto something because I'm like, I knew that things did not feel right my whole life. And now I'm starting to speak up about them, and other people, instead of saying, we understand or we want to try to understand you, they were just like, don't think that. If you even start doubting, then you're gonna, go down the path of leaving the cult, which I mean, I think it's kind of telling on themselves a little bit. But yeah, I think the ability to start to change who I am really came from me looking at my life going, something doesn't feel right, and I need to figure out what that is.
God, that's so brave. And for everybody who's listening, and for all of the women that I work with, that's like where we start is, okay, something feels wrong. Something feels off. Like there's something in my life that's not bringing me the level of fulfillment that I desire, and creating that level of awareness around it in the first place. Because if you don't create that level of awareness, it's really hard to change it. You can't change what you're not willing to recognize and what you don't recognize. So just having your willingness to look at those things and be like, okay, this isn't working for me, is such a courageous act. And so tying into the next part of your story, that you're saying that you had a really challenging relationship with your mom based off of how she was and her mental illness and what she was experiencing. What did that look like for you? And what was your dynamic like with your mom?
Ooh, that could be its own podcast right there. But
Yeah.
just to go back to what you were saying, that feeling of not feeling right within your body, feeling something that was wrong, I'm so glad that that's the work that you do with your clients, because that has been my guiding light the entire time. But to go to my relationship with my mom, it was pretty bad from the beginning. One of my earliest memories is being like 4 years old and just being like, I hate you. And just feeling like I really hated this woman. And as difficult as that is to hear and to say, I felt from a very early age that tension that she had because she was so mentally ill. I wasn't allowed to have my own voice. She had a lot of outbursts, and when those outbursts would be directed at me, the oldest girl, there's a lot of different factors that go into it. My mom is also Mexican, and so in her culture, the men and like the machismo culture was like very, very prevalent in our home. And my brothers had a completely different mom than I did. As the oldest girl, I was expected to do, a lot of the cleaning and the cooking, and the expectations of carrying a lot of that emotional labor was set on me. And so when I would try and fight back with that, my mom would go to, all out punishment. So I didn't have a safe place within the home where I could be myself. And I found that the easiest way for me to kind of avoid her wrath was to just conform and to learn how to flatter. And I don't know if anyone here has ever had relationships with narcissists, but you become really adept at learning how to stoke their ego in order for you to not be a target for their rage. And so I learned very early on how to do that. And there was always this very false sense of like relationship and insecurity between us, because she would consider me, her really good friend. And, we had such a great relationship. But if you ever asked me, I would be like, I do not like that woman at all. Like, she is mean to me. She uses every opportunity that she had to really tear me down from the way that I looked, which really contributed to a lot of, eventual eating disorders and body image issues, to how I felt about myself, my ability to make friends, my ability to be a wife and be in relationships. So the dynamic with my mom and I was just a very sad woman who had a lot of pain and had a lot of trauma, but instead of working through that, decided to project that onto me and asked me to heal a lot of those through almost like healing for her. But the dynamic changed when I realized that I couldn't do that anymore.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm. First of all, thank you for being so vulnerable and being so open with us, because again, like I said, I know so many people are going to resonate to this, because there's a lot of narcissistic parents and toxic family households that don't get spoken about enough in like our world, because it makes people uncomfortable to talk about these kinds of things, when in reality it's like, this shit is actually happening.
Yeah.
And I honor you so much for the change that you've been able to create, and like the life that you've been able to build for yourself based off of where you've come from and the experiences that you had growing up. So for somebody who's listening to this and is like resonating with your story, what's like the first few steps that they can take, or what were the first few steps that you started to take to remove yourself from that toxic environment and from those relationships that really weren't serving you, to start to build the life that you have now?
Well, it was a very long process. It was not overnight. It took, probably like 5-6 years to understand the abuse that my mom was putting on me. And the first step I took was going to therapy and really being honest about how I was being treated within the relationship with my mom, because sometimes we have protectiveness over people that we love, and your mother is a nature relationship. That is by nature, you are drawn to have a relationship with your mother innately. And so I did at times feel pretty protective over her, because I had so much compassion for her trauma and her story. But once I started in therapy, really speaking about the dynamic and speaking about how I actually felt about her, my brain started to put together how abusive and unhealthy the relationship was. And after about 2 years working with a therapist that I love, he changed my life. I owe so much to him. We were talking one day and he goes, why do you keep staying in relationship with someone who treats you like this? And I was like, well, she's my mom. Like, I feel so obligated to her and to my family. And, there's a lot that goes into my story, and he knew it all at that point. So he sets down his notebook and he looks at me really seriously and he says, Adri, I don't often assert my opinion into people's experiences within therapy, but I just want to tell you, like, you don't owe anyone anything in this world, and you don't owe your family especially anything, because he had known all of the abuse that I'd suffered. And that was a really big turning point for me in going, how much of myself am I going to continue to sacrifice in order to make other people feel comfortable and to make their experience within the world peaceful, whereas I am having a terrible, unpeaceful life because of their treatment of me. And so one of the things that I decided to do over the next year was I had to make the decision to go no contact with my family, which was incredibly difficult, heartbreaking, and it was not a decision I wanted to make, but I knew that that was the only option for me, because one of the first steps after therapy was I tried to implement a lot of boundaries, and it was clear they weren't going to be respected. So I knew that for me, in order to live a healthy and whole life, I could either have a relationship with my family or I could not have a relationship. And so I chose the peaceful and the powerful decision of going no contact.
Absolutely. And within no contact now with your family, what do you feel as though your experience is versus where it was when you were trying to implement those boundaries? Like, how do you feel different on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I think I will tell people it's a really difficult decision and it is not easy. And there are times where it's incredibly lonely and it's really hard. But I will say overall, my life has improved an amount that I can't even express. I was able to do things in my life and believe in myself for the first time that I had never been able to do, because I had so many voices in my life telling me how bad I was at things, how I didn't deserve to have good things, how I was just like a failure in everything I did. And once I silenced those voices and moved out of that family, I was able to just open up a whole new world of wonder, because it had never been accessible to me, because I had spent so much of my time just trying to survive the day-to-day within my family, that once I stepped back and I realized how unhealthy and toxic and abusive their treatment of me actually was, I was able to have freedom and peace. And with that came an amazing amount of inspiration for a new life that I could build for myself.
God, so powerful. It's really interesting for me because something that I've experienced over the past year is one of the dynamics in my immediate family coming to me and telling me that they completely disagree with the life that I've created for myself and what I do in the world, and have since completely distanced myself from this family member because of the fact that there just isn't a common ground that we can reach at the moment. And I can fully relate on the fact that, like, even just in that experience and like what hasn't ever been abusive between the two of us, like that was fucking challenging to look at that situation and say like, okay, the world tries to tell us that like family over everything, blood is thicker than water, like you need to stick by your family no matter what they're doing, unconditional love, XYZ, and understand how that can actually harm us so much more than making the decision to distance yourself or cut ties or go no contact for a period of time or for however long you need to. So for somebody who is in like a situation where they're starting to recognize that those conditioned beliefs of like, you need to stick by your family no matter what, or have unconditional love for them or whatever it may be, how do they start to identify that like that may not actually be serving them, and that doing something like going no contact with their family or distancing themselves from their family could actually really benefit them?
Well, first of all, I'm really sorry that you've had that experience with someone within your family, because that's so painful. You're living your dream life and people aren't accepting of that, which is something that I have a hard time understanding, why people wouldn't see people living in joy and be happy for them. So, I know how hard that is. In terms of the whole belief that family is everything, and what people could start to do is getting into therapy, getting into healthy relationships where the dynamic is not making you feel off kilter, and listening to your body and figuring out what feels good to you within healthy relationships, and then applying that standard to your relationship with your family and saying, if these people weren't my family, how would I allow them to treat me? How would it make me feel for them to be able to speak to me the way that they are, for them to have beliefs about me that they project onto me that I have to carry because they're very strong beliefs? And I would just start to ask myself these questions. Why do they make me feel this way? What about me is evoking such anger in them that they feel the need to treat me XYZ, however you're being treated, and really examine the belief of, if they weren't my family, would I allow somebody to treat me this way? And I know that there's so much grief that comes with having to admit that your family is treating you really horribly. And so I want to honor that. And like Kat said, going no contact for everyone isn't always the best decision, and it isn't always the long-term decision. Sometimes you can go no contact for someone for a year, learn your boundaries, and then step back into the family and assert them, and it be a really good relationship because your family missed you, or they now understand boundaries and they want to respect you. So it looks differently for everyone, but at the end of the day, if you have relationships in your life that make you feel very off kilter within your body, ask yourself, would I let people who love me treat me this way if they weren't my family? And would I treat somebody else this way? Because at the end of the day, when I really stepped back and looked at my family and I saw the way that they were treating me, I was like, I would never in my wildest dreams ever treat someone like this or allow someone that I love to be treated like this. And that was a huge turning point for me in my journey.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There's two things that you said in that like hit so deeply as you're saying them. First one being the how you feel in your body. And I think that this is huge for everybody, but specifically for the women that are listening, because we're primarily a group of girlies here listening to the No Bullshit manifestation show. And something that I've discovered for myself in the past like 2 years of being on my healing journey is the more that I listen to my body and what my body actually wants and needs, the closer I get to living life in alignment with what is serving my highest good. And I think that a lot of the times we think about that in the way of like exercise and diet and nutrition and what products you're putting on your face or in your hair or things like that. But we don't think about the relationships in our lives and how those relationships actually make us feel inside of our physical bodies, because that is such a massive indicator of like, how safe do you actually feel? How honored do you feel? Like, what standard is this person showing up and like holding in your life? And even for me, like, that's like a big moment of like, whoa, like, damn, like thinking about your relationships and how they make you feel inside of your physical body and being able to return to that place of, okay, like, do I like the way that I feel inside of my body right now? And if I don't, then what can I do to start to change that? And then the other thing that you said that really hit me was that the being able to get into relationships that do feel really supportive to you, do make you feel really safe and secure inside of your body, and being able to use that as a benchmark of what standard you are going to hold every person to in your life. And that if you do not feel that way inside of your physical body and inside of like your emotional and mental state when you're in the presence of these other people in your life, then why are you not raising the standard or holding a standard or eliminating the people who aren't meeting that standard?
Yes, 1000%. And I think that's sometimes really hard for people to come to terms with, because for so many years they have, and I don't want to use the word allowed, but almost like their family has treated them with no boundaries in terms of how they've allowed them. And so people almost kind of have to accept like, oh, I have let these people treat me this way for so long, and now that I have a new standard, I almost have to kind of accept that pain of understanding I let people treat me that way for so many years. And that's sometimes really hard to accept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. So for somebody who maybe is in that position and they're accepting the frustration or pain that they have been in relationships with their family or with other people that haven't supported them so fully, how do they start their healing process from there? Or like, what's the next step of the healing process from there?
I think getting really clear on the type of relationships that you want to have in your life and how you want to feel within them, and practically making a plan, whether that be through therapy, whether that be working with a life coach, someone like me that specializes in the healing journey, and just start making a plan of, what do I want my life to look like 6 months from now, a year from now? Okay, what would have to change within my life for me to get to that place? And for everyone, that could be different. For some people, that could be, the practical things could be setting boundaries. The practical things could be stepping back from relationships entirely. And so it really looks different for each person, but I would encourage the person to figure out how they want to feel. If they want to wake up every day and be excited to get text messages from their loved ones, and they don't have that sense of dread every time they go to check their Instagram and they see that people have criticized their body or whatever that is, start figuring out what you want your life to look like, and then figure out what in your life is not aligning with that, and figure out how you can either change it or eliminate it.
What do you feel like has been the biggest shifts that you've made for yourself when you've done that for you, of like looking at your life and what wasn't aligning with the life that you wanted to create for yourself, and those like big shifts that you had to make to get to being in the place that was like, okay, now I feel like I am living my best life?
Oh my gosh, the big shifts were being able to use my imagination, because the life that I had wanted to live, I couldn't even conceptualize what that would look like. That I had to like watch TV shows and be like, okay, that's possible. I had to follow people on, social media and be like, okay, if it's possible for them, then I want to imagine that that could also be my life. And so the biggest shift that I had was just allowing myself to feel joy, allowing myself to believe that I was worthy of having a life that I love, allowing myself to feel confident in the decisions that I get to make about myself, and understanding that a lot of people aren't going to agree with them, but because they align with who I want to be, they were the right decision and I was going to follow them. So it's really that self-trust piece where I was like, there's no evidence in your life that things are going to work out, because they haven't so far. But I trusted in my own ability, in my own heart, and in my own spirit that I was going to be able to create the life that I wanted, simply from looking at what other people have and say, if it's possible for them, it's possible for me. And I love my life now, and I hope that I get to be that for other people.
Absolutely. I adore what you just said, because I think that a lot of the times when people hear like what needs to change, what needs to shift, they think about like, what externally from themselves do they need to take action on or do in order to get to that place, as opposed to what you just said. I feel like is such a crucial and like centerpiece for somebody who is wanting to create their dream lives, is that like it literally starts by starting to understand what's available to you. And you can do that through watching movies. You can do that from seeing people that you admire online, or reading books, or having conversations, listening to podcasts, whatever it may be, and seeing that as you taking that like aligned and inspired action to move the needle forward towards creating a life greater than the one that you're currently living.
100%. And I think you talk about this on your podcast, and you may have even been one of the people that helped me with it, but the idea of expanders and expansion, of feeling like if you can just see that it is happening somewhere in the world, then you can apply that to your own imagination. And yes, that has been so crucial for me. And again, like the steps are very much internal, and I can give you practical steps, if we work together and we figure out people's situations, but internally is where you need to do a lot, if not most of the work.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. I think that in my experience, when I finally got that, I was like, damn, okay, so what I was doing before by moving from city to city, moving from apartment to apartment, relationship to job wasn't actually like the success and the love and the validation and like the connection that I wanted to feel inside of all of those things. I always thought it was going to come from the external. And as soon as I could point that finger back around at myself and be like, oh, it actually starts here, it gave me all of the power in the world to be like, oh, wow, like things are actually changing, things are actually shifting. And because of that, then also had the power to make those external shifts in a way that was going to create big changes for me. And something that we haven't talked about, but I'm going to brag on you for, is the fact that Adri literally was in like a 6-figure tech job and realized that that was not something that was in alignment with her living her best, most abundant, happiest, fulfilled life, and did the internal work, and then was like, you know what? I want to help people who have been through similar experiences to me. I know that I've gone through this path and had these experiences that we've talked about on this podcast episode for a reason. And it's to be able to guide people on their journeys. And because of that, you started your life coaching business, which is like the coolest fucking thing ever.
Well, Kat, I have to admit that like you were a huge part of that journey. I am a graduate of your academy, and I remember you, I think like one of our first conversations, you're like, have you ever thought about being a coach? And I was like, no, never been a coach. I was secure in my 6-figure tech job. I knew what I was doing. I had some bad, relationships with coaches, and I was like, no, no, no. And then the more that we worked together, Kat, you were like, have you ever thought about being a coach? And I was like, ugh. So I thought about it. And the more I thought about it, I was like, I can't get away from this, because a lot of times you hear in the coaching industry, like it's not a career, it's a calling. And that calling has been on me for so long. And when I first went to college, I was like, oh, maybe I should be a therapist. But I was like, I really don't want to work with people and their trauma. And the beautiful thing about being a life coach is that you look at people's life going forward, whereas trauma looks at their life going backwards and helping them do a lot of the work surrounding that. And so, Kat, you were a huge part of my journey of why I'm here right now, why I'm a life coach, and why I'm doing what I'm doing. Thank you.
Absolutely. Full circle moment. The fact that you're on the No Bullshit Manifestation Show, because I'm pretty sure you found me on TikTok and then started listening to the podcast.
100%. And I was like, all right, I gotta talk about this.
Being on the podcast.
Amazing. Thank you for having me. I mean, thank you so much.
Absolutely. So I guess like to start to wrap up our conversation, because I could chat about this forever with you, for somebody who's resonated with our conversation, what would be like a few practical steps you would encourage them to take to start to shift the circumstances that they're in?
I think surrounding yourself with really good people and starting to build a community where you feel healthy and safe. So number one, get into community in whatever way you can. There's so many resources, whether that be through like therapy resources, or there are different life coaches like myself who do healing groups and who have different modalities that we use toward group healing, and that builds your community. Start finding people on social media that you want to connect with or that you resonate with, and follow them and listen to them and interact and build relationships with them. You can start by just observing who you would want to be in healthy relationships with and start putting yourself around them. So build those healthy relationships. Number two, understand that the internal work is going to take a lot of time. So dedicate a good amount of your life to doing that. Figure out journaling prompts, or buy journals that have prompts about how you can start to listen to that internal voice of how to trust yourself, how to know when relationships don't feel good within your body. And then number three would definitely be listen and learn how to honor your body and its wisdom in everything you do. And like Kat said, we often see that in how we eat or how we exercise and how that relates to our physical body. But internally, our body knows so much that it tells us before sometimes our cognitive brain is catching up to it, because they talk about the gut is your second brain, but honestly, like the gut is my first brain, because now I listen to it. And so learn how to tune into what your body is telling you. So yeah, I think all those three things.
Amazing. And last question that I have for you, this is the one that we always ask on the No Bullshit Manifestation Show, is doesn't have to be related to this or can be related to this, but what's one piece of no bullshit advice that you would give to everybody listening?
Even when it doesn't feel right to anybody else, but it feels right to you, listen to it and do it. And if it feels like everyone is saying, you need to act a certain way, you need to be a certain way, you can't make that decision. If it feels right within your body, trust it and do it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Mic drop.
And that's on trusting yourself, everybody.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Amazing. So I know that people are going to want to be able to connect with you after this conversation. So where can they find you and what do you have going on right now that they can be a part of?
Yes, so I'm on TikTok is the platform that I'm on and most active on, and it's just adri.co. So it's ADRI, my first name, DOT.co. And I also have the same username on Instagram. I'm more active on TikTok, but I still do Instagram. Right now, I have a 3-month program for a one-on-one. And then if people are interested in what I kind of referred to earlier, which is a group coaching program surrounded around the theme of toxic families or going no contact, or really just starting your healing journey and needing support from other people who are on that journey. There's a wait list for that. And so that's going to be coming in the next few months. But otherwise, I would love to connect with people on social media. I'd love to hear when certain things resonated with people and just begin conversations and relationships surrounding other people who are on their healing journey.
Amazing. And like Adri said, in her practical steps to be able to really start to create this shift in your life, surrounding yourself with people who are on a similar path on this journey, who want what's going to align with them being the best, most supported version of themselves is so crucial. And connecting with Adri is an incredible way to do that. So all of her information is going to be down below in the show notes so that y'all can connect with her. But Adri, thank you again so much for this powerful conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. And it really is a full circle moment. So thank you so much, Kat.
Absolutely.